In this particular section, we're going to be looking at two types of credibility modeling. The first one involves a study we did in chapter 2.3 when we looked at the very volatile piece of business. Let's just look at it again. It was CompA. These are the paid losses. Let's open them, and you can see they're quite volatile. And we actually illustrated that the calendar year trend is pretty stable, and the model projects the volatility of the paid losses in the future. However, if we estimate the calendar year trend, let's just really estimate it, we find that it's not significant. But you could argue it's also not significant. This calendar year trend is not significant because there's so much process variability. There's a lot of process variability. You do have normal distributions. So you could argue there probably is a trend. We just don't have a significant or credible estimate of it. So what we're going to do now is look at the industry data. And the industry data, let me tell you, is very different. It's got very different features for this particular company. First of all, it has different trends, and it's got much less process variability. And that's something you would expect, but it's also important to realize that it has very different trends. And we also will see this when in the Chapter 4 videos, when we study companies that we kind of select from AM Best Schedule P, we also notice that no two companies are the same, and no company is the same as the industry. So there's a composite of the industry and this particular company. And I'll run the related models, which is Good One and Uptall. And you'll see that there is process correlation between the industry and this particular company. It's not that high, but it is significant. It's 0.24. And now what I'm going to do is, or in fact before I do this, I want to show you that the trend structure for the industry looks like this. There are major calendar year shifts. I mean, these are quarter years, so sometimes you've got a trend of 19% per quarter. Okay, sometimes it's 0, but by and large, from the second quarter of 91 to the third quarter of, or the second quarter of 94, you've had major trend shifts. Yet for the company, it's essentially 0 or very small. So what we do here, now again, before we do it, I'm sort of rushing a little bit here. For the company, this trend along development years is 0. In fact, if you look at the residuals at the same time, if anything, it's slightly positive, but not significant. Whereas for the industry, it's actually going down. So what we're going to do, let's see, it's going down from development year 14. So what I'll do first of all, introduce a parameter from 13 to 14 for the actual company itself. Then I'm going to reinstate all parameters, and then I'm going to optimize. Okay, we still find out that for the company, the development year trend starting at development year 9 is still 0. It's flat. For the industry, there's a decay. The other thing we find out for the company is that the estimate of trend now is significant, and it's 2.95% plus minus, well, a very small standard deviation. So in this credibility adjustment that we've done, everything has been done in terms of the relationship between the two pieces, in terms of what's going on in the data. We didn't force anything into the model. Everything is based on the data. So, as an example, this trend was credibility adjusted according to the industry trend just in the early years. However, the development year trend, this particular trend, the evidence wasn't strong enough, the relationship between the two, to actually credibility adjust this trend. If I now do a forecast just for company A, I'm going to get a slightly higher reserve distribution, higher mean, possibly higher standard deviation, because now instead of assuming a trend of 0, I'm assuming a trend of 2.9% plus minus small standard deviation. So if I look at the logbook for company A, it's 143 million plus minus 16 million instead of what we had in chapter 2.3. If you assume the trend was 0, was 130 million plus minus 13. So this is one example of credibility modeling where you use collateral data, but only the information in the collateral data that is related to your own experience that is actually credibility adjusted. Okay, there's another example of credibility modeling. It involves two companies, Company A and Company B. There they are. Now, what's going on here, let me run the independent models or the related models, which is good too for each. You'll see that for one company, Company B, there's very little data. So it's a very small triangle. So they only wrote business 98 and to 2001. Company A has written business from 93 to 2000, and now it's in runoff. 2001, it's already in runoff. But it's the same line of business, and there's some kind of other interrelationship between these two companies in terms of the way they did business, which I'm not going to go into. But for Company B, really, for instance, we don't have a no development year trend there because we don't have any data there. So what we could do, let me remove this so I don't replicate. So let's call that independent modeling. Let's go to Company B. Now, Company A has another parameter from 3 to 4 and 6 to 7. So let's do the same thing in Company B and estimate that. But let's set this parameter to be the same as for Company A because it's based on very few data points. Now that one, of course, there's no data there, so we'll use the estimate for Company A. So let's set it to be the same. You notice, so we're designing a development pattern for Company A using, for Company B using Company A data. What about the inflation? If we go to the inflation, you'll notice that Company A has got a very high inflation, 98 to 99, and then a much lower inflation. So, or calendar year trend. Some people don't like to use the word inflation. So if we go to Company B, let's set a parameter there which would represent the average inflation, and then set that, say, to be the same as the Company A, I mean. But of course, that's a very high trend, so we'll have to have a new parameter here. You can see it's much too high. Now the question is, do we want to set that trend to be the same as Company A? Well, let's see. We've got an estimate of 0.94 plus minus 8. Well, that's a huge standard deviation. Whereas Company A is 28% plus minus 6.5. I would argue statistically they're probably not the same. We could set them to be the same. I think if we do, let's just try it. Let's save that as optimal 1. If we try and set these two to be the same, you'll see that it's too high. Okay, you've got a negative trend, so let's remove that. Now we're going to use this model for Company B to forecast its reserves, but the assumption going forward from 1999, we're going to assume that the true trend, because we're including parameter uncertainty, the true trend comes from a normal distribution with mean 9.45% plus minus with a standard deviation of 8.62%. That is part of our model assumption going forward. We don't know the true trend. It comes from this distribution. So now we only have to forecast for Company B. So that's the forecast we get. In the early years, all these are zeros. And I know the exact assumptions are used to obtain a distribution with a mean of 191 million and a standard deviation of 64 million. Let's review the assumptions. These are the development year trends. Actually, we should have removed that difference, but that doesn't matter. That's the accident year level, That's the process variability. The standard deviation of the normal is 0.33. That means the coefficient of variation of the log normal for each cell, just based on process variability, must well exceed 0.33. Do we have normal distributions? The answer is we do. Don't have many observations, but we have normal distributions. And going forward in terms of the calendar years, we've made the assumption that the true trend comes from that distribution. So I can qualify all my assumptions to obtain this reserve distribution. Let's now find some quantiles or percentiles, value at risk, and we'll look at quantiles, and we're doing descending order. So even though the mean is, say, 191 million with a standard deviation of 64 million, if you look at the 99.5 percentile, you're looking at wow, you got a lot of value at risk. I mean, this distribution is extremely skewed. If you want to look at the distribution, you'll see that it's extremely skewed. Okay, we're looking at around a mean of around 200 here, and yet you've got observations that exceed 400 million, double. So again, to the table, and this table is very important. And this table, in calculating this table, we've included the parameter uncertainty, and we've also included the process variability inherent in this particular triangle, which is not the same as in company A. Let's just check. That's the process of the standard deviation of the normal for company B. It's different for company A. Let's calculate the standard deviation. 0.47 versus 0.33. And it's not something that you credibility adjust. You never credibility adjust the process variability. It's inherent in that particular piece of business. Thank you.